The meeting will begin in 1 minute. The meeting will begin in 1 minute.
I call this meeting to order and welcome to the Tuesday, February 27th informational meeting. Our first item of business this afternoon is a staff report from Mr. Jim David, our operations manager.
Good afternoon, council members. Well, it's hard to believe, but we are only 1 week away from when a bill must pass both houses on March 6th. And a week and a half away from when they adjourn to allow the governor time to review all of the bills that have been passed. The legislature will then reconvene on March 26th to consider any vetoes. One bill, Senate Bill 58, is already on its way to the governor's desk. This bill would allow tax increment financing for affordable housing projects. Senate Bill 58 has passed both the House and Senate by large margins. Senate Bill 84 was heard in House Judiciary yesterday, but 2 committee members were absent. A motion to defer the bill to the 41st day was 1 vote shy of the 7 needed to pass. The chair ended up deferring the bill till tomorrow. Senate Bill 84 would prevent the state or any of its political subdivisions to enter into a confidential agreement. The proposal to repeal the sunset on the 911 surcharge, Senate Bill 98, is scheduled for Thursday in House Local Government. This bill had passed the Senate 26-3 earlier this month. Yesterday, Joint Appropriations approved a Hog House amendment to the state's Veteran Cemetery Bill, Senate Bill 91. The amended bill appropriates $600,000 from the state's general fund to cover the initial cemetery design and planning work. The bill also establishes a $3 million endowment through the South Dakota Community Foundation to assist with future operations. The bill also appropriates the federal funds if the cemetery application is successful this fall. Joint Appropriations approved the amended bill 17-0. The bill is expected on the Senate floor this week with House consideration to follow shortly afterwards. Since this bill was approved by Joint Appropriations, it will not need additional committee consideration in either House. Oftentimes, and I noticed it here, that when you hear the word hog house, you assume probably the worst. You assume that the bill was gutted and was used for another purpose. But in this case, the hog house amendment actually strengthened the intent or the goal of the bill. Senate Bill 91 now includes an operating fund, a private endowment, and appropriates federal funds. There are also subtle changes to the wording illustrated in the 2 directives to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. The first line is the new language in Senate Bill 91 and is more of a command by stating the word, the Secretary shall submit the necessary applications. There's not a lot of wiggle room in the word shall, whereas the previous word authorizing is far more permissive. Joint Appropriations left little doubt that the application will get filed before July 1st of this year. Happy to answer any of your questions.
Very good, Jim. Thank you. Any questions for Jim? It is great to see the results of the Veterans Bill after some touchy moments there. It seems like we came back even stronger than before, so it's wonderful that we're at this point now. I just hope that we can take it across the line. So thanks for the report, Jim.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm certain that Councilor Rolfing would be happy about the results as well, too. Okay, City Council open discussion. Do we have any items? Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I just wanted to give an update. It's been a while since we've had open discussion. So I wanted to give an update on the cupcake story that we've all been hearing about. I got involved when this was posted on Facebook on an entrepreneur website that said, I'm no longer able to do this. The media quickly reported on it, and it really became an issue throughout the city. But this isn't just about Sioux Falls. We've learned that this is really a state issue. And while we thought at first that this was only for certain businesses, this does impact all businesses, whether you have a liquor license or not. Last week, Senator Peters did hog house a bill. I know we just heard some information about that. Senate Bill 169 was hog house, so the body was replaced with a germane topic, and this bill was passed, allowing just traces or small amounts of alcohol to be used while in the frosting and things of that nature. What we also found out is that while the liquor license holders thought they were exempt from this, they are not, and so they would not be able to have higher amounts than what was passed. And so it did pass the Senate floor with an emergency clause, which means when it is finally passed, it will become law immediately. It will be heard on Monday in House Judiciary. I've spoken to most of the committee, some of the committee members, and we'll speak to the rest of them. There was a call to action by some of the businesses to reach out in support of this. There will be an amendment offered by the group that does represent the liquor license holders, making sure that they're protected and really carved out that they can do higher amounts if they actually have the liquor license. You just have to follow the law of can't serve to anyone under 21, etc. So that will be heard on Monday morning. This really is an old antiquated law from 1939, I believe, that really until it becomes an issue, sometimes we don't realize that it is an issue, and businesses evolve and change over time, and so this is just a prime example that we should always be looking at our current situation as far as making sure we remove some of the old antiquated laws and folks that are trying to be creative in their business and use that license that is a substantial amount of money to their ability. So this will be heard Monday morning. Stay tuned. From there, it'd go to the House floor. It does still have an emergency clause, which means that it would have to pass by a supermajority on the House floor. If it is amended, either the Senate can concur or they have to go to what's called a conference and work out their differences, so to speak. So I just wanted to make sure you all heard it at the same time, since a lot has been changing with it. I'm super thankful to Senator Peters and Solholt for taking this on and kind of running with it as well and helping these small business owners. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But it's been quite an interesting ride talking about cupcakes for the last few weeks. So thank you.
Any other items? Councilor Staley.
I have two citizen items. First of all, I want to say thank you to Mark Weber. He's sitting out in the audience right now. And Mark has been sending us, as a citizen, his monthly evaluations of our sales tax revenue. He goes to the state's website, he looks at what's been happening, and he does a little analysis. And I think it's really neat when we get citizens who are willing to take an extra look a little more deeply, and help us to be informed, and we have our own finance department doing that, but it never hurts to have another set of eyes, so I say thank you for that. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I got word today of the death of a dear friend and a very important man in our community, in our diocese, the Catholic diocese. Father Al Krzypolski died, lost his battle with cancer today. And Father Al was a very good friend of mine, and I know he served many people in this part of the state in the Catholic diocese, serving as pastor. And he was 93, and this man said Mass, went to weekend assignments into the last year. He was diagnosed about 2 months ago. So he was a wonderful man, and I just wanted the citizens to know that he has passed. He was always interested in city affairs. We had lunch in January, and he was out. We had spirited discussions about what was happening. He was very supportive of things I was doing, and he was very supportive of our city government. So Anyway, God bless Father Al, and just wanted the people of our community to know that.
Thank you. Any other items for open discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed then with our agenda. 4A is our Audit Report 17-05, Maintenance of Administrative Instructions by Abby Vandelinati, our internal auditor, and Kim Schroeder, our internal audit manager. So welcome.
Good afternoon. The Maintenance of Administrative Instructions audit was included on the 2017 annual audit plan. The purpose of the audit was to review the policies and procedures as well as the executive orders established by the City of Sioux Falls to ensure they are maintained, accurate, and up to date. In addition, this audit included researching and reviewing industry-leading practices to determine if there are any policies and procedures not currently in place by the city that are deemed necessary. City charter and ordinances grant authority to the mayor to prescribe rules and regulations dealing with the administration of the city through executive orders. Executive orders are developed by various city departments and reviewed by Human Resources, Finance, and the City Attorney's Office prior to being signed by the mayor. Any city department that determines an executive order is needed may write and submit a draft that is signed by the department's director. Policies and procedures are internal documents that are specific to day-to-day operations of the individual departments. They are written by department staff and approved by the department's director. Each department is responsible for writing, approving, and maintaining their own policies and procedures. The city does not currently have a centralized process in place for maintaining written policies and procedures for each department. The objectives of this audit were to, 1, determine if the City of Sioux Falls policies and procedures are maintained, accurate, and up to date, and 2, to identify areas where written policies and procedures are not in place but are deemed necessary according to leading practices. The scope of this audit included a review of the City of Sioux Falls executive orders and departmental policies and procedures that were in place as of June 30th, 2017. It's important to note that the departmental policies and procedures that were gathered include only those that address the following internal controls: segregation of duties, authorization and approval, reconciliation and review, physical security, access, management oversight, and critical job functions. Our audit work is listed on page 3 of our report. This report and its conclusions are based on information taken from judgmental samples of executive orders in addition to departmental policies and procedures. Please note this does not represent an examination of all executive orders and all policies and procedures of the City of Sioux Falls. Regarding the results of the audit, our testing found that executive orders are accurate, up to date, and regularly maintained, with minor exceptions as listed on page 4 of our report. Regarding departmental policies and procedures, we found that internal policies and procedures are accurate and up to date with a few exceptions, as noted on pages 4 and 5 of our report. We have 1 recommendation and 2 opportunities for improvement that address these results. The recommendation, we recommend the city establish and document a plan for managing the approval, issuance, and revision of internal policies and procedures. This should include defining a custodian at the departmental level, requiring scheduled reviews that are dated and initialed to demonstrate completion, and requiring policies to be maintained in an easily accessible centralized location. Management responded. They agree with the recommendation made in this internal audit report, and the date of expected implementation is the end of 4th quarter 2018. The following opportunities for improvement were identified during the course of the audit. These opportunities will provide oversight to the policy and procedure documentation process. First, city management should continue to work toward documenting in writing policies and procedures that guide specific job roles in the organization. Additionally, policies and procedures should be consolidated as much as practicable to eliminate duplication or unnecessary documents. Second, management should consider adding an attestation section to the employee performance evaluation to obtain annual certification from employees that they have been train and understand the departmental policies in addition to the certification that they have reviewed the executive orders identified in the policy review checklist. At this time, I'll turn it over to Kim for the remainder of this report.
Okay, thank you, Abby.
Hi. I'm basically reporting on results of Objective 2 that Abby read to you, which was the comparison of the city's policies and procedures to leading practices. The Government Finance Officers Association, which is better known as the GFOA, represents public finance officials throughout the U.S. and Canada. They publish best practices that identify specific policies and procedures that contribute to improved government management. From that list, we identified 22 policies and procedures that we believe government should have in place. During the course of our audit work, we determined our city has adopted those 22 policies, and they are documented through a combination of methods, which include city ordinances and resolutions, executive orders, internal policy and procedure, and notes to our city's CAFR. The majority of the policies that we identified as necessary were financial in nature, and we did find that overall our city demonstrated good financial management practices that have a strategic long-term approach to financial management. We believe these formal policies are key because they do promote stability and continuity, manage risks, and define a shared understanding of how the city will manage its resources to provide the best value to our community. The GFOA also recommends governments establish policies and procedures to encourage and facilitate the reporting of fraud, abuse, and questionable practices. The City of Sioux Falls does have an anonymous fraud hotline for reporting these matters and has provided employee ethics training in the past. However, we do feel this is an area where there is an opportunity for improvement. This is noted on page 6 of the report. Internal Audit is suggesting that the city provide formal ethics training to all employees on a recurring basis. The last citywide training was conducted in late 2007, and we are suggesting that that should be done on more of a 3 to 5 year basis. Additionally, the city's fraud hotline should be more publicized on the city's internet so that all employees are aware of how to timely report fraudulent, illegal, or unethical activities that they observe. And that is something where I will work directly with media services to get that implemented. In conclusion, we just want to say thank you to all the departments. We did require assistance from almost every department in the city as we gathered hundreds of documents in order to choose our sample from. And then we want to reiterate that this is a positive result from our audit work. The city has done a good job of developing, documenting, and maintaining accurate and up-to-date policies and procedures. And our recommendations and identified areas for improvement will only help the maintenance of those documents be more efficient and structured and will benefit the day-to-day operations. With that, we would entertain any questions you'd have.
Any questions? Councilor Staley.
Well, first of all, Kim, I love that you're talking about this fraud hotline for the city employees. I guess I haven't really ever heard anything about that. But I think letting the public know we have something like that set up, it would be a valuable tool for public relations. Okay, because I think I could go out in the street and talk to people and they would not be aware that we're doing anything like this.
The fraud hotline that we have established is for employees to report, not for public to report.
No, I understand, but just to say, I think that it's beneficial to say to employees, we want you to be watching. And last year when we went to Pittsburgh to this, what was that, National League of Cities, we went to this, they offered all these wonderful workshops, and one of them, they talked about getting employees involved in asking them to find ways to save money. And then if they found ways within their department to save money, then they would get some kind of an incentive. And they were saying that the people who really know what's going on are, of course, the people within the system. So I think that's great. Thank you for nailing that down. Now, I've got a question here for myself and the public. But when we talk about executive orders, they only come through the mayor, correct? And we don't approve those at all. Okay, so how would, let's say someone else, our new mayor comes in and says, hey, I don't really like this executive order. Is that something that's real pliable and they can just whisk it away, or how do you negate an executive order? Because we're talking about all these executive orders we have here. So how, because they're not ordinances, they're not protected by a vote of the council. And maybe Jim, if
Jim could come forward.
I'll take a try at this. An executive order.
Jim, could you introduce yourself?
Yep, Jim David, Operations Manager for the council. An executive order, the mayor is directing his staff or his administration. So a new mayor could come in and make changes to the executive order. It does not need approval from the council. It is just simply a directive that he or she is giving their administration, and so they can amend it, they can remove it. It's at their discretion.
So is that, then do they make an official movement? I mean, when you're saying we're going to take this.
So any changes to the executive order, the process that's in place is that change or that new executive order goes to the city council and also to the city clerk's office. And the city clerk's office then maintains hard copies of the executive orders in this office.
But there's no oversight. So a mayor can he can do whatever he wants to with an executive order.
There's certain restrictions, and if it goes beyond simply directing his staff, then the mayor cannot do that. But if it goes over or exceeds that, a perfect example was there was an executive order that had dated several years that stated that citizens cannot have a gun on them entering this building, and that was rescinded because that is a state law. He or she, the mayor, cannot direct that, and therefore that was rescinded, and that just is directed to city employees.
Okay, and then policies and procedures, do we as a body, we don't have anything to do with the policy?
I'm not really familiar with the policies and procedures. The council has their own procedures manual, but I'm not familiar. This is on the administration side.
Right, and when we're talking policies and procedures, we're talking about how do we safeguard assets? How do we implement internal controls over things? So it's day-to-day operations, the direct employees. So I don't believe those.
So it's not necessarily a policy that would impact the citizens. This is only policies that are going to be impacting employees.
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if I could.
Okay. Go ahead, Councilor Starr.
Thank you. Kim, so when I go to the most important part of these reports for me are the recommendations, obviously. So Director O'Toole responded on behalf of the administration. Are we expecting him then in the fourth quarter of 18 he's leading the charge on the recommendations then? I mean, he's got the action part of it, or is it something that we as a council also need to help draft or be involved in that part of the process?
I don't believe you'll have to be involved. Director O'Toole was who he identified because this is kind of city all-encompassing and it deals with employee relations. We do a follow-up on all our audit recommendations, so we will follow up to make sure it's implemented. At the time of writing the report, we didn't know if the best way to accomplish that recommendation was through an executive order that stated that each department had to put all written policies and procedures on Insight or on the shared drive, whatever. So it's just a work in process, and they're going to work out the details of how they want to accomplish the results.
It does seem to me that it's something that probably should be addressed in ordinance of how this procedure that goes. But I think that's a debate that we can have as we move forward. And I think it would probably make sense to work through one of the council's committees as we bring a draft form of how we do this. And I'm assuming the city attorney's office will be included in that debate as well. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item B. Our audit report 17-07, waiver of fees and fines, and this will be presented by Ashley Vandenberg, our other internal auditor. Welcome.
Good afternoon. The purpose of this audit was to identify how much revenue is foregone annually due to fees and fines being waived, and to determine how those decisions are made. In 2016, the city generated approximately $99 million in various fees and fines. Since this amount is financially significant, it's crucial that the city is mindful of how much revenue is lost or could be potentially lost due to fees and fines being waived. If the process is not properly administered, the potential for lost revenue increases, and it may be difficult for the city to make accurate budget projections. The objectives of this audit were to determine how much revenue is foregone annually due to fees and fines being waived, determine if the city effectively administers fee and fine waivers, and determine if controls are in place to prevent unwarranted waivers of fees and fines. For the results of the audit, we did not have any audit recommendations. We determined during this audit that there's not an excessive amount of fees and fines being waived. We found that it's not a common practice for departments to waive fees and fines except under management approval or under instances that are allowed by ordinance or executive order. We estimated the amount of revenue foregone to be $863,000 during 2016 and $776,000 during 2017. Since the departments were able to provide us with this information, we then know that they are tracking and overseeing waivers and reduced rates of fees and fines. We also determined that they are maintaining proper support and approvals when necessary in order to justify why they would waive or reduce a fee or fine. To conclude, we determined that only about 1% of the total amount of revenue generated from fees and fines is foregone annually due to authorized waivers and reduced rates. The city departments have an appropriate system in place to effectively administer waivers and reduce rates. Knowing the amount of fees and fines waived or reduced allows the city to see the impact of waivers and reduced rates to the budget and whether those waivers and rates are effectively adding value to the city. That concludes my presentation. Does anyone have questions?
Any questions? Okay, Councilor Staley?
Do you keep track of this like yearly as far as how much we're bringing in? You said it was like 99 million.
Well, I can put together stuff. We don't keep track of it yearly.
When's the last time this was added up?
Well, I obtained the information from the city's financial reports.
When was the last time you?
An audit like this has never been done before.
So there's never been like a total accumulation of what these departments are bringing in?
Well, if you look at the budget.
Fees and fines?
Every budget, all the CAFRs, they all have that in there. That's
Yearly.
where I gathered the data from.
Okay, so I could go back 5 years and see what we were collecting in fees and fines. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Councilor Starr?
Yes, thank you. Did you look as well at like rental agreements or management agreements, if there's ever an opportunity where management takes a look at waiving fees for rental facilities or any of those type of things? I know one of the things we're looking at today is the management agreement with Great Bear, or the informational part of it. But are other city buildings and rental opportunities? The Pavilion probably wouldn't be a good example, but maybe the Orpheum or SMG's contract. Do we waive fees as part of that if a group isn't able to make their payments?
Right, and that's actually a good question, but that wouldn't have been included in the scope of this audit. Okay. Great Bear and those outside partners of ours, we'll audit those separately, so that wasn't included here, but that's something that could be looked at in the future.
Thank you.
Because we do have them as part of our audit program going forward.
Makes sense.
Any other questions for Ashley? Okay, fine. Thank you, Ashley. Good job. All right, now we're moving into the next item. Item C, our 2017 year-end financial report, and our Director of Finance, Mr. Tracy Turback, will be presenting.
All right. Good afternoon, Councilor Kiley, councilors. Tracy Turback with the Finance Office with the 2017 financial results presentation. We have had another good year. Certainly had some challenges, however. As I think you all know, the economy locally is doing quite well, and we'll cover some of that in the presentation. The city did end 2017 in strong financial position. This report does include what we refer to as preliminary financial information. The annual independent audit is in progress. However, it has progressed to the point where we're quite confident that the numbers in our year-end financial report are very unlikely to change as a result of the audit. So that's when we come forward to you folks every year at this time to present these year-end financial results. So with that presentation outline today, I do want to just touch on the economy as I do every month throughout the year with you. The meat of the presentation really is the financial results. We'll spend a number of slides on the general fund. That's really kind of the primary focus of interest in this presentation. Also touch on the capital program, which you've heard some about in the last couple of weeks or so. Also touch on the enterprise activities. And then before I wrap it up, we'll have a couple slides on city debt as well as an outlook for the future. So with that, we'll get started. Looking at the economic snapshot for 2017, the unemployment, as this graphic indicates, shows the unemployment rate in our local MSA for the last 3 years, 15, 16, and 17. And you can see it's been really quite stable, staying between 2 and 3% for 3 years now. So we haven't seen a lot of variation in that. We did end 2017 just slightly above 3% at 3.1%. So we continue to see very strong employment in the local economy. Again, I think you're all aware that 2017 was another very good year in terms of permitting of construction activity. This graphic shows the most recent 3 years, at 2017 hitting for the 5th year in a row now a new all-time high of $739 million in permits issued. We did see some strong increases in new residential construction, and a big part of that was growth in the construction of single-family homes. So that's certainly encouraging to see those numbers come in the year very strong as well. Looking at sales tax collections, this represents our 2-year history on a rolling 12-month growth rate for our general sales tax. We ended 2017 at 1.2% growth over the prior year. You can see last year in 2016 we grew at 3.4%. So the rate of growth did slow down. Again, no real surprise to you folks. We've been talking about that for some time. You can see that it really has, the growth rate has plateaued somewhat, that right around 1 to 1.5% for most of the last year. I'd say 8 to 9 months of the last 12 have been right in that ballpark. We also look at the entertainment tax collections. Again, these are on a rolling 12-month basis. Ended 2017 growing by 1.3%. This is a much smaller pool of sales that are subject to this, so it is more volatile. That's the reason you see more ups and downs throughout the year. It doesn't take near as many dollars to move that growth rate from month to month, but certainly not a trend that we'd like to see. Over the last couple of years, it has certainly continued to grow, however, not at the rate that we would like to see. We do have January numbers, incidentally, in this. The growth rate, the 12 months ending January of 18, it did jump back up to 2.2%. So again, that's fairly volatile, but we do watch that quite closely because we think it's a good indicator of discretionary dollars that are rolling around in the local economy. All right, then getting to the kind of the thrust of the presentation today, the financial results. We'll look first at the general fund. Of course, our general fund is the city's primary operating fund, and it's where we budget for and cover the costs of providing police and fire services, parks and library services, street maintenance, snow removal, engineering, public health, all of the general government services are all covered within the general fund, and this is where really the primary focus is when we talk budgets or city finances. So first, we'll look at an overview of the general fund. This is a history at a high level of revenues and expenditures for 2015, 16, and 17. You can see going from right to left on the graphic that revenues have continued to grow. They grew from 15 to 16, and again from 16 to 17, we did see growth in the revenues. However, that rate of growth overall in the general fund has slowed somewhat. The growth in 2017 represents about $4.7 million, or a little over 3% growth in general fund revenues in total. We did see growth, of course, in property tax revenues driven by that construction that we've been experiencing the last few years. So the growth in property tax revenues has really been driven purely by growth of the tax base. We did not have any sort of inflationary adjustment in 2017. So the additional property tax revenues are all due to that growth in the tax base. We did see 1.2% growth in our sales tax revenues, as I mentioned. We're encouraged a little bit that late in the year, the information we're seeing in sales tax growth did appear to be improving somewhat in the last 3 or 4 months of the year. Sales tax audits, we also got some help late in the year with some significant collections from the state as they're out doing audits. We took in more audit dollars in the last 3 months of the year than we had in all nine months prior to that during the year. So that was a nice little boost that we got toward the end of the year in terms of our general fund revenues. Looking at expenses, of course, in the general fund, for the last couple of years, we have been placing heavy emphasis on controlling the growth of expenses and putting a lot of focus on identifying the efficiencies and improvements in productivities within those general fund departments so we can stretch the dollars further. A lot of investments have been made by the city over the years in technology, and we're certainly seeing some of those investments pay off in terms of efficiencies. 17 was really a year where the budget was based to deliver really the core city services. There weren't any big new initiatives within the general fund budget. We didn't see any significant one-time projects as we've had in recent years in terms of major remodeling projects, or we didn't open a new fire station, for example, like we did in 2015. So actually the overall total expenditures from 16 to 17 declined slightly. You can see it's down year over year by about $600,000, which is somewhat unusual, I guess, for total spending in the general fund to go down from one year to the next. So that's really, again, the drive to focus on those core services and live within our means, because we knew revenues were starting to slow down, and so we had to focus on controlling the growth of expenses as well. In spite of an overall decrease in spending in the general fund, within that, there is an increase in spending on wages and benefits for employees. You might recall that when we first talked about the 2017 budget, the total budget was flat, but there were budgeted increases for wages and benefits, and that certainly did carry through. The total wages and benefits expenditures within the general fund in 17 were up about 3%, or a little over $3 million. So even though total spending was down, we did increase spending on wages and benefits for our city employees. So looking at the bottom line, then the net number, the past few years, you can see that revenues have come in under overall expenditures in the general fund in 2015 and 16. However, in 2017, revenues did exceed expenditures by $4.1 million. And so that net amount results in an increase or an addition to our general fund reserves for 2017. Looking at again, the same revenue and expenditure numbers for the general fund, just from another perspective, comparing it rather than comparing it to history, comparing it to the budget for 2017. Revenues overall, again, $155.7 million. That's $1.1 million below budget, or about 0.7 or 0.7% below what was anticipated in the budget. And I'll provide a few more details on that revenue number here on a future slide. Expenditures, you can see, were under budget by $7.4 million. We recognized very early in the year, as you folks know, In fact, back in as early as the second quarter of 2016, that sales tax revenues were not growing as they had been, and so we immediately implemented strategies to target spending growth in certain areas and constrain spending in other areas. So that's certainly a reflection here in the 7.4 million, or about 4.6% under budget from for the overall general fund expenditures. In addition to those contingency plans that were executed in 2017, we did have some good luck and frankly good fortune in terms of the expenditures that were incurred. And I'll cover that just a bit more in a minute as well. So again, the difference between the revenues and expenditures, you can see the original budget. We anticipated using $2.2 million of reserves within the original 2017 budget. And again, the actual results reflect an increase as a result of revenues exceeding expenses of $4.1 million. So how did we get there? How did we end up actually exceeding expenses by $4.1 million? Well, it's really the work to constrain spending, or the growth of spending, really is a result of a combination of hard work and good luck, frankly. The hard work, as I mentioned, we started 2017 with a very good plan. Before the year ever began, we had a contingency plan for every department and identified opportunities for savings within those departments and worked that plan all 12 months of the year. And so that really was a significant contributing factor to bringing the expenditures in under budget. On the luck side of things, we did experience, as I mentioned a moment ago, sales tax revenue growth that did improve later in the year. So throughout the year, we were managing, anticipating the potential of sales tax revenues actually declining, or at the very best, maybe remaining flat. As you saw, we ended up growing throughout the year by a total of 1.2%. Much of that improvement really occurred toward the end of 2017. I mentioned the audit collections that really helped us out late in the year. In terms of another item of where we had some just frankly good luck. No surprise to anyone, the favorable winter weather that we had the last couple months of the year really saved the city a bundle of money. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. We spent far less the last quarter of 2017 than we would on average spend in the final quarter of a year, and that really saved us a lot of dollars out of our 2017 general fund budget. And the last thing I'd mention in terms of good luck is that we did enjoy good fuel prices all year long. We paid actual fuel prices below what had been budgeted, and so that was certainly a favorable item. One thing that we don't really have any control over, but it certainly translated to expenditure savings for the city. Okay, so that's kind of the overall view on revenues and expenditures. Drilling down a little bit more on general fund revenues, again, you see the same total, $155.7 million. In actual revenues, $1.1 million below budget estimates. One thing I'll point out here is just the importance of sales tax revenues and property tax revenues. You can see they really comprise the lion's share of revenues within our general fund. In fact, over 3/4 of the revenues in our general fund come from those two sources. So those are just really critical, and you might think of it as really the city's bread and butter in terms of where the money comes from to provide our services. Some of the other budget variances, in addition to the sales taxes that came in 1.9 below budget, we also had charges for services that were under budget by about $800,000. That relates largely to the charges for services from our public health clinic. They were down one full-time position dentist. That translates to fewer patient visits, fewer charges, and of course in that environment there are a lot of services provided that we generally don't expect to be collecting charges for in the first place. We did overrun the estimate on licenses and permit revenues. Again, that goes back in large part to the high level of construction permitting that took place in 2017. So those revenues were about $800,000 over estimates, so that was a good thing. And in the other category, I'll mention our interest earnings on the city investments from our general fund exceeded budget estimates by $400,000. In recent years, we've been earning next to nothing on city cash and short-term investments, where we've actually seen that pick up to where we're actually getting paid a little bit on our money. So that kicked in a little bit to help offset that shortfall in sales tax revenue. So all those things net out to, as I say, $1.1 million revenue shortfall compared to budget. So that's the revenue picture. On the expenditure side of things, again, the bottom line is the city spent $151.6 million from its general fund in 2017, leaving $7.4 million unspent out of the $159 million budget. That's really, again, I can't compliment my team and all the departments that worked all year long, really stepped up their game and managed their budgets like never before. And we worked together in a collaborative way with all those departments. And really, I think we're quite successful in finding opportunities to save that really didn't impact significantly the services provided to the public. You can see in the highways and streets, there was significant savings achieved there. That reflects, that's where our snow removal budget is included. And about half of that, or almost half of that, $3.2 million savings comes from snow removal money that we did not have to spend. The other takeaway from this chart that I'll point out is general government. You can see there was a $1.5 million balance in the budget. And the general government, of course, that's made up of a number of different departments. It includes the mayor and council, it includes finance and HR and city attorney and central services. So all of those departments combined make up a relatively small part of the budget for the general fund. In fact, about 10% if you add them all up. But the savings of the share of the $7.4 million, about 20% of that came from general government services, general government budgets. And so that, I think, really makes the point that we've really tried to focus on frontline services to the public and save money in kind of the behind the scenes, the back office kind of operations that don't really directly impact the services that are provided to the public. So we're very happy about that. All right, so we've talked about revenues and expenditures, and I'll walk through the kind of how that all nets out at the end of the day then for our available fund balance. You can see we started 2017 with an available fund balance in our general fund of $42.2 million. The revenues and expenditures for the year net out to that $4.1 million, so that's an increase, or works toward an increase in our general fund available balance. There were some changes in some of the restricted dollars held within the general fund that worked to increase the available balance by another $400,000. So the net change in available fund balance in the general fund for 2017 is $4.5 million, which makes our year-end available balance of $46.7 million, and that translates to about 29% of our general fund budget. So comfortably above the 25% policy target. The 29% that's where we, just by comparison, where we ended 2015. So just a couple years ago, we were at about that same level on a percentage basis. One thing that does in terms of having that reserve balance, and we've talked about this before, but specific to 2018, it certainly puts us in a good position as we move into 2018 and as we begin to develop the 2019 city budget. Having solid reserves certainly puts the city in a good starting place. One thing I'll mention that the 2018 budget has considerably less risk in it than what we had a year ago looking at the 17 budget. And that's really because of the lower sales tax growth projected in 18. If you remember, the 2017 budget was based on growth in sales taxes of about 4%. This year for 2018, we've included growth of about 1%. So we feel like that's going to be obviously a much easier target to hit for 2018 So it certainly reduces the amount of risk that we see in the 18 budget. And as I mentioned, the sales tax growth trend over the last 8 or 9 months really flattened out and in fact has shown some indications that it may be strengthening in just recent months. And time will really tell on that. So looking at the available fund balance on a graphic basis, this is a historical picture from 2010 through 2017. You can see we've ended, as I say, at 29%. At 2017, exactly where we were on a percentage basis a couple years ago. And historically, we've spent, I think our general fund reserves have spent more time above 30% than they have below. So by comparison, we're certainly in the ballpark. Couple of comments on if you look at the graphic in 2015, you can see that amount came down. In 2016, it came down as well. Those were really planned for drawdowns of reserves, and in 2015, for example, that's when we opened fire station number 11, and we've talked about that before, that when we open a new station like that, that's a lot of additional operational costs that come online, and we have to absorb that, and so we saw that happen in 2015. We also did some remodeling in City Hall and some tuck pointing, a major tuck pointing project at Central Fire Station in 15. So those were kind of one-time, those two things were one-time charges in 15 that we were able to utilize some of those dollars above that 25% level for those projects. And then in 16, kind of in a similar way, the Cayley Branch Library remodel was budgeted for, and that's why we ended up drawing down reserves a little bit in 2016. So in a nutshell, the general fund, certainly that's our bellwether fund, I guess, as long as our general fund is in excellent financial condition as it is, it's certainly a very positive thing for the rest of the city as well. General fund revenues, as I mentioned, continue to grow. The expenditures are being well managed. We're certainly living within our means, and our reserves at year end are very, very healthy. One last slide on the general fund. This is the same thing I showed you a moment ago in terms of the history. I've just added the column with the 18 budget, so you can see kind of revenues and expenditures historically and where we think we're going in the next year and what that will mean to our general fund balance. So you can see again, 15 and 16 we drew down on reserves. In 17 we've replenished them some, and we've budgeted 3.9 million reserves to be used in 18. We don't certainly project that we will utilize that much in reserves. It'll be it's forecast to really be something less than $1 million that we would draw out of reserves. So with that, the bottom line really is that the city's general fund is positioned very well as we begin 2018 and developing the 2019 process. We know we're going to have a new mayor in a few months, certainly 2 new council members. Those things, those changes alone certainly provide the potential for changing priorities or new initiatives. A lot of new ideas I'm sure will be coming. The city's ready for that. Financially, we're well prepared for that. You folks know that we are currently undergoing a compensation and benefit study for our employees. That could certainly have some budgetary implications, and we're well prepared for that. We do expect that there will continue to be upward pressure on part-time wages in the employment environment that we have, and so we're anticipating that part of our budget to continue to be pressured. And again, given our position and our strength, we're certainly ready for that. You know that we're going through a public safety facility study that will inform decisions about where and when a new fire station is constructed and open. Again, we're ready for that. The population's growing, and certainly there are a lot of potential things that can come down the road and come up unexpectedly. You know, one of the things we talk about from time to time is the emerald ash borer and what potential budgetary impact that might have on the city at some point. The city's ready. That's the bottom line. I think we're ready for everything we've been able to identify, and we're certainly well prepared for those things that we haven't yet identified. So that wraps up the general fund piece. Touching quickly on the capital program, this is just a sampling of some of the projects that were completed In 17, it was another very aggressive year for the capital program. There were 75 projects completed, almost $100 million in investments in infrastructure, and another nearly $12 million invested in capital equipment to keep our departments operating. As you folks know, we left $3.3 million of funds available, and you've recently directed that 1.5 of that be utilized to pay down debt for the city, and the remainder will stay where it is for now until decisions regarding that are made in the future. Touching very quickly now on enterprise activities, of course, our enterprise funds are the five funds that include parking, electric lights, landfill, water, and water reclamation. These funds are intended to be self-supporting, where rates are to be set to generate revenues that would be sufficient to cover all the costs of providing those services, including capital and debt service. So we focus very heavily when we talk about enterprise funds on cash flow. This graphic is a high-level summary of the cash flows for all 5 of our enterprise funds. You can see all 5 generated positive cash flows from operations. So when they're covering all their costs of operations and have cash left over, that means there are dollars available to make those capital investments and pay down debt for those funds that have debt. A couple highlights here that I'll point out. The parking fund ended the year with $5.4 million in available cash, and as you folks know, a good share of that will be invested in the new ramp along with proceeds from a bond issue. The water fund, I'll point out the $39.1 million cash outflow for capital and financing activities. That reflects the $25 million pay down on the Lewis and Clark bonds that was made in late 2017. And the last item I'd point out is on the water rec fund. We continue to invest cash along with some SRF financing on investments in infrastructure for our sanitary sewer collection and treatment system. So you can expect to see more of that in the years ahead as well. That's all included in our 5-year capital program. All 5 funds ended the year with solid cash balances. So again, another point of strength for the city. Before I wrap it up, I want to talk just a little bit about outstanding debt. I know that's a key area of interest for the council and the public. It is an area that's commonly misunderstood, often exaggerated or misstated. But let me again reassure you that the city debt level is very manageable, and for a community our size and with the growth that we're seeing, the level of debt that the city has is quite appropriate. Mayors and councils, both past and present, have been very prudent in the use of debt financing for the city. So with that, how did the big picture, the debt picture change, and where did we end? We do classify debt into 1 or 2 categories: governmental debt or enterprise, and overall the decrease during 2017 was just under $39 million. So we had, at the end of the year, almost $39 million less in debt outstanding than we did at the beginning of the year. The governmental debt, sometimes we refer to that as tax-supported debt. That's primarily repaid with our second penny sales tax revenues. There's also some debt in there that's repaid with storm drainage fees and TIF revenues and so forth. You can see the governmental portion of our debt decreased by $11.5 million. The enterprise debt, which is really water and sewer, decreased by more than $27 million in 2017. In the case of the water fund, debt was down over $34 million, and water rec was up about $7 million. As I mentioned, we continue to invest in the infrastructure for water rec. Again, an overall decrease of $38.8 million in 2017. Very, very significant for the city. This shows kind of both past, present, and future in terms of the outstanding debt for the city. Runs from 2010 on the left side out to 2023, 6 years into the future. And it shows you, based on what we know today, and what our debt levels will be in the future. And just looking through that, you can see that in 2012 it peaked at $399 million. That, of course, was after the event center bonds were sold. Throughout this time frame, we were also doing a certain amount of borrowing for water improvements early on and water rec pretty much throughout this time frame. You can see then from 2012 through 2015, it was really a pretty steady decline. A modest uptick in 16 when the administration building bonds were sold, along with some water rec borrowing. 2017, you can see a fairly significant decrease that reflects on top of the normal debt payments, the pay down on the Lewis and Clark bonds. And for the next couple of years, we expect it to increase slightly as principal payments offset new borrowing that's planned, again, for storm drainage, water rec, and of course the parking facility. And after 2019, we're projecting a very steady decline so that by 2023, that level would be down to $217 million. Looking at that graphic, in just 4 years, by 2021, the overall debt outstanding is projected to be $264 million. So if you find the year 2021 and go up, you'll see $264 million is the amount of debt outstanding. That's less than before the event center bonds were sold in 2012. And so that's what I talk about, or that's what I mean when I'm talking about the manageability of the city's debt level. We do maintain a rapid rate of repayment on debt. We don't stretch it out any longer than we absolutely have to. That accomplishes a number of things. One, and first and foremost, I think most importantly, maintains flexibility for the mayor and the council so that when you do want to borrow money, as you repay it more quickly, you recapture that capacity and that ability to take on new projects and meet new challenges in the future. Certainly makes it possible. The more quickly we pay off debt, it makes it possible to keep up with our growing community and the growing infrastructure needs that we have. And of course, last but certainly not least, by paying it off quickly, it reduces the overall amount of interest expense to the taxpayers. Another just kind of nugget regarding debt that I'll give you that based on the schedules in place, so we ended 2017 with about $304 million in outstanding debt. In just 5 years, about 43% of that will be paid off, more than $129 million. In 10 years, almost 80%. And how many of us would like to have that in terms of our own personal balance sheet? And the assets will live on long after the bonds have been paid off. So that's the financial presentation for today. I'll just close with the outlook for the future, and these are the priorities in the 2018 budget. Nothing has changed there. This is a financial presentation, so I'll focus on the last bullet there, maintaining the city's strong financial position. You'd have to look long and hard, I think, to find a weak spot in the city's financial condition, and that really doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen as a result of haphazard decision-making. It happens as a result of good planning, robust forecasting, and lots of hard work and due diligence by many people, including you folks. The city's solid financial condition today is a tribute to all the people, past and present, who have made it a priority to keep the city strong. For those of you who are leaving the council, you can leave knowing that you're passing along a city that is on rock-solid financial ground. Those who will serve the city in the future certainly owe you folks a debt of gratitude, and I certainly want to express my sincere gratitude for your effective leadership and stewardship to help us get us to where we are today. Questions?
Okay. Any questions? Councilor Neisert.
Thank you. On your chart of total outstanding debt, so if I understood you right, so that the look forward for 5 years, that's factoring in the schedule of debt pay down plus all of the things that would be in the CIP, any projected borrowing that we're going to do, so that number is...
That's correct. It includes, for example, the parking ramp bonds that have not been sold. It includes water rec borrowing that are for projects that are in the 5-year plan.
Sure. So if there's like a basin 15 sewer in 2019 or 20 for $7 million, that's factored into that.
Right.
Into that graph.
That would tend to increase the amount of debt outstanding, and then the repayments are assumed then going forward.
Okay. And I certainly do not want to minimize this chart. This is very, very good to see. Now, of course, it could, any future administration may come up with some new priorities and, you know, do one large bonding on a new building or something like that, and that would change the number, but.
Absolutely.
But obviously we can't see the future.
This is based on what we know today.
Absolutely, yep. So in 2017, did we have any effect on people's property taxes increasing? Were we completely flat in all of our?
There was no inflationary increase, so it would be, I mean, it's on an individual basis. If the value of their property changed, certainly their amount of taxes would change, but not because of a city rate increase.
Okay, and then for the entertainment tax, is that around $6 million a year?
6 to 7. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so something like a Pheasant Fest, would that alone, would that be enough to move the needle appreciably with just one big event in the trend line?
It'll be interesting to see when those numbers come through if there's any discernible change in that for February. We certainly saw, and we referred to it as the Garth effect in September when we had 9 sold-out shows at the event center for Garth Brooks. We did see a jump that much, or that month, and we attributed that to Garth and Tricia, but I suppose that's debatable as well. We just don't have that level of detailed information from the state.
Sure, that was going to be another one of my questions. And then, if the general fund reserve balance starts getting a little too high, how does one start to move that down? Do you just do that in your budgeting in the next year to try to bleed some of that off?
That's typically how it's been managed in the past, right? I mean, there are always one-time projects out there that can be tackled. Certainly we know, and we do forecast that out for many years into the future. So we are looking out into the future, knowing that as the community continues to grow, we will be adding staff, police officers, other general staff. We know that every so many years we're going to have to open another, very likely be opening a new fire station. So we program that all in so that we manage to that 25% level.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Staley.
Thank you. Got a few questions here. Tracy, is there like a proportion or a percentage that we could tell citizens from their property tax bill that the city gets? So when we say, well, you know, whatever your property tax is, the city's getting, they get 50%, school gets 10%. It's divided up that way, correct?
It is divided up, yeah, but I can't off the top of my head tell you what percentage it is.
Do you think it's more than 30%? Well, I mean, because if we're
generally the school districts get the largest share. Again, I don't know what the percentage share is that they get, but we do report that out, and I know that's included in our annual CAFR that we publish. So I can certainly get that information.
Yeah, that would be good. I'd appreciate that. Okay, so because I guess I tend to think of property taxes supporting schools, but it is a big part of our budget as we've seen here. Okay, then the other thing I wanted to talk about was the park budget. And I know we were talking last summer about programs being cut, the summer singers and different things, and then there was also media and attention and citizens wondering about cutting back on the mowing procedure there, and there was somewhat of a reference to lack of funds, trying to cut back a little bit. I see that they, instead of spending they only spent $18 million out of proposed $18.1 million. So you're talking about we're in great shape. Is there a chance those programs could be re-implemented?
I think every year the Parks Department reevaluates the programs that they offer and the activities that they do, and they certainly make judgments as to what the priorities are, and I don't expect this next year will be any different.
Because it sounds like things are looking up from last summer, correct?
Well, it's very, very early in the year of 2018, so I wouldn't get too over-eager in terms of increasing spending on programs that may have been eliminated in the past.
Well, because we always want to kind of come back to the quality of life that we've had in the past, too, I do think. You talked about $3 million up on wages and benefits. Is that because of that 1.5% pay increase?
That would certainly be part of it, right? We had a health insurance increase, so the city's share of employee health insurance premiums increased in 2017 as well. So So that was another significant piece of that.
And then how much does like new employees, does that factor into it as well?
In 2017,
When you talk about,
we
could that,
had
that
very
would,
few, yeah, if there were any, and I know we did add some police officers, but off the top of my head, I can't recall if we added any others in 17 besides police officers.
okay. And then when we're talking about the enterprise funds, water and the reclamation, do you have like I see, okay, so we can say to the public, right now we've got 12.8 million in the water fund and approximately 23 million in the sewer reclamation fund. Do you have like a target amount you like to keep in those funds? I mean, could that go down to 10 million? Would that, or are you going for a certain amount?
We do, and I think we talked a lot about that when we did the water refinancing on the water bonds for the Lewis and Clark project, that we did a lot of evaluating just how much should be there for a day-to-day operating reserve. But it also, a big share of that cash typically is built up and spent down as capital projects are done, so we can execute some of those infrastructure investments without the need to go out and have to borrow every time we're going to do a significant project. And that's what you're seeing in the Water Rec Fund, for example. I know just within the last couple months, we came to you and had you amend the capital plan for a Water Rec project that had previously been planned to be paid for with borrowed money. Because of the balance, the cash balance in the fund, we changed the plan to pay that project with cash, and so
right. And I
that's
know
how those dollars
some
get
property
utilized.
was purchased out of that the water fund as well, according to Mark Cotter. So what I'm just wondering is that you can't say, just like we have our reserve funds that we have a certain amount we want to have. That's not necessarily anything firm.
What we do is we look at that on a long-term basis because we know these capital projects are typically in water and water rec are quite large. So we'll look at that over a longer period of time, and rather than say we need X percentage, it's really looking at the dollar amount. How many dollars are we going to need in 4 years or 8 years or 12 years to tackle these big projects?
Okay, and then you were talking about this, you're going to they're doing a study, and I know Bill O'Toole mentioned this, on wages and benefits. Is that going to be something that would be used as a tool to say we're going to have an increase in salaries, or how do you plan to implement that?
Yeah, and I'm not personally very involved in that, but I know that's something that the city has periodically done. It's every, 5 to 10 years, I think the city does something like that, probably closer to 10 years. And the primary point, as I understand it, is really just to make sure that we haven't strayed too far from the market for what the market should be paying for certain positions, so that we can remain competitive in what today is a very, very competitive environment for attracting employees. So if the study reflects that we're paying way below the market for a certain type of position, I would certainly think that could have an impact on city employees that happen to be in that position. And certainly the reverse is true. We may find that we're over the market in some areas.
And then the employees would use that information in their negotiational proceedings then?
It's all shared with the unions, as I understand it, yeah. So everybody kind of has the information in front of them and can draw their own conclusions.
But you would never use that to give them a pay decrease, I would think, right? We're not going to go backwards for them.
You're asking me to speculate on something that might happen.
Counselor, we're going to need to move on to other counselors here at this point.
Okay, I have one more question, but I'll let other people.
Later, if we have time. Okay. We actually have another item left on the agenda, and we have a hard stop time of 5:20.
Well, listen, point of order, Mr. Chair. I have a right to ask as many questions about this as I would like to.
No, you do not. The protocol is 2 to 3 questions, Counselor Staley.
Is that written down somewhere?
It's been our tradition.
Not since I've been on the council.
Counselor, you're wasting time. Any other counselors have questions?
Point of order.
Counselor.
Point of order. Calling the counselors.
Erpenbach.
Point of order.
This discussion is just taking up time needlessly.
And I think there's an important discussion to have for our citizens.
Absolutely.
And to say that asking questions about the budget is wasting time to me is insulting.
Counselor, what was wasting time was debating the issue, not asking the questions. Counselor Erpenbach, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate the depth that Councilor Staley's going into, but I think too that the point is that we're headed for a 5:30 and our appointment is walking in the room at this time. I just wanted to come back to that idea of the reserves to in comparison to our budget numbers. 29% is higher than it has been for the last couple of years, but it's not nearly as high as it was years ago. I mean, I'm looking now over an 8-year period of time, and I guess just on behalf of Councilor Rolfing and I, that's been one of our sort of pet peeves, constantly, not a pet peeve, but one of those things we've watched very closely is that 25%. And so I guess it's not really a question, it is really that kind of applause and cheer to the staff that this is one of those things that's really critical to us, to the ongoing health of the community, is that we do maintain at least that 25%. And so I just appreciate the work that has gone into making that happen. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Councilor Staley, if you can ask it quickly, please.
I will ask it in the manner I need to
Staley,
ask it.
please.
This is an abuse of the power.
Exercise a degree of decorum,
this
please.
is exactly
a degree of decorum.
Exactly, and respect for our ability to ask questions. Okay, I have another question. I would like to know. We are going to be paying $10 million for our bond payment for the event center. Is that correct?
No, it's not that high.
What would you say it is?
I think it's around $8 to $9 million.
And then what is the yearly payment going to be for the administration building?
Yeah, I don't recall off the top of my head. It's all in. It's certainly all in our annual financial report, but I can certainly get you that information.
Well, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Director Truback? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, with this next item, I know the schedule says a 10-minute presentation with only 6 minutes remaining. Are we going to be able to do that and do it well? And still take
believe
discussion?
so. I'll do what I can to get through this as quickly as possible.
Because we do have to we have to allow 10 minutes to change over from this meeting to our county city meeting. Thank you. And this next item is Great Bear Management Agreement, and Kelby Miraz, our Park Operations Manager, is going to present this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, City Council. Kelby Maris with Parks and Recreation, here to discuss with you the Great Bear Recreation Park Management Agreement. As we all know, Great Bear is a staple for winter recreation in our community. However, this agreement is for year-round management of the park. Great Bear Recreation Incorporated is the current manager. The agreement that we have with them at this point expires on April 30th of this year. We are proposing to enter into a new 5-year agreement with Great Bear Recreation Incorporated. Some quick history about the area. Great Bear has been city-owned property since 1948. The ski operation started in the 1960s and was privately run until '91. At which point Sioux Falls was formed and later became Great Bear Recreation Incorporated in 1997, at which point they led a capital campaign to improve the area to help fund expansion of Tubing Hill, the Terrain Park, and the chalet. Some of the responsibilities that Great Bear Recreation has is to operate, manage, and promote year-round recreational facility. And also, this does include the winter operation or winter sports activities, of course, but also includes summertime activities, hiking trails, meetings, wedding receptions, and that kind of thing. We do collaborate on snowmaking and other winter sports activities. They sell lift tickets, they have equipment rentals, provide ski lessons and concessions. They also provide facility rentals as well for the chalet. They provide a large amount of insurance for the area, and they market the park and amenities year-round. Some of the past performance from Great Bear. In 1992, we had about 10,000 visits. Last year, in a shortened season, we had about 33,000 visits. And over President's Day weekend this year, there was over 4,700 visits. So really good year so far this year at Great Bear. I mentioned the capital campaign, but Great Bear Rec continues to improve the area. The chalet, the Tubing Hill, recent improvements to the Tubing Hill, the Terrain Park, the hiking trails, and a tube storage building that's out there as well. City responsibilities, we are responsible for facility maintenance, capital equipment repair and replacement. Talk again about the collaborating of snowmaking efforts and the winter sports activities. We also groom cross-country ski trails throughout the park as well. We're also responsible for the grounds maintenance, as it is a city park, the mowing, trail maintenance, prairie restoration efforts that have gone on out there, parking lot maintenance, which includes snow removal, and unfortunately sometimes we do that to ourselves. And the park board does set the fees for lift tickets and facility rentals. Some other important items. Great Bear Recreation Incorporated is a nonprofit organization. There is no management fee that is paid to Great Bear Rec as part of this agreement. All of the profits are reinvested into the park. We've talked about some of the improvements already. The board of directors are volunteers. This is a 5-year agreement with an option to extend for another 5 years. And essentially the relationship that the city and Great Bear Rec have remains consistent with the current agreement. So I apologize for going so quickly, but Dan Greider, General Manager with Great Bear Rec, and Steve Sanford, the President of the Board, is here as well, and we would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for Kelby and this particular management contract? Councilor Erpenbach.
Question for you, Mr. Chair. When is this, do we know when this is scheduled to, it's next week, first reading, so that we'll have some opportunity to ask questions in more depth at that time.
Right.
Given our time constraints.
Resolution.
It's a resolution, I apologize, but it will be on next week's agenda, and we have time between now and then to also email Kelby, so.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So it was important to get it in yet this afternoon.
Right.
Thank you very much for your effort. Any other questions? Councilor Erickson.
I just want to say thank you for providing the document to us. I know that the ordinance wasn't in place yet, and so thank you for honoring our intent and having this to us early. I just have one question. I'm curious if there's ever, when was the last time we did an RFP? I'm not suggesting that we do one, but when was the last time that that was looked at?
We haven't done an RFP for this management agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
I will just second my thanks for sending it to us in advance. I have some technical questions, but because of time, I'm just going to email or call.
Okay, thank you very much. Any others? All right, seeing none. Then this meeting is adjourned.